Welcome to VFD Vibes, your place for all things related to variable frequency drives. If you're interested in how to make things turn, or manufacturing technology in general, then this is the place for you. I'm your host, Greg Weichman, and today we have a special episode. For those of you close to the HVAC world, you would know that last week was AHR Expo in Orlando, Florida. As a VFD manufacturer with world-class HVAC drives, yes, I went there, we had our own exhibitor booth and several associates in attendance. For today's episode, I have 4 guests, all who attended last week, and they're going to provide some show observations, industry outlooks, and personal perspectives. If our audio sounds a little different today, it's because we're using a different mic setup to facilitate this roundtable discussion. With that, let's start by going around the room and having everyone introduce themselves. We'll start to my left.
Hi, Greg. Thanks for inviting me. I'm Michael Hall for Yaskawa, and I'm a product manager of the Microdrives.
Hi, I'm Jordan Engel, and I am a Drives product manager focused on HVAC and our matrix technology.
Hey everyone, Edward Tom, product manager here, and when it comes to HVAC, my big focus is going to be anything of the communications world, so a lot of BACnet for me.
And finally, Don Cameron, I'm the industry segment manager for HVAC for Yaskawa.
So Don, with you being the HVAC business lead here at Yaskawa, I'm going to begin with a general question for you. Can you tell the listeners what exactly AHR Expo is, kind of the goal of the show, who attends as exhibitors, and who the typical attendees are?
Great question. It's actually one of the longest running trade shows in the United States, going back to 1930. The first show was in Philadelphia, which is kind of impressive when you think about it. For perspective, auto shows actually kicked off right at the turn of the century in Detroit, 1899. So basically, one generation after the auto show started, air conditioning became a pretty necessary part of modern life. It's made possible the mass commercialization of synthetic refrigerants in the 1920s. Folks had been tinkering with the refrigeration cycle throughout the 19th century. However, it was not until synthetic refrigerants became made in mass that it became an industry. You can't drive to work in that suit and tie and expect to sweat all day. Those drafting tables get sticky quick, especially if you use the eraser a lot. The AHR show, in all seriousness, is the big show for HVAC. If you are in the business, you attend or you exhibit, your absence is conspicuous and a curiosity if you don't show up. The folks who make sheet metal bending machines for large OEMs are there. The wonderful people who sell piping of all types, copper, PVC, they're all there. And now AI has begun its infiltration into the show, which we can touch on later. It really is the most diverse cross-section of the industry you could find, with every type of person imaginable attending. The nicest professional engineers you will ever meet are in the HVAC business. I've been going to the show for 20 plus years, and every year there's another person who needs a proper VFD 101 lesson, and I'm happy to oblige.
I can attest, having 5 of us guys in the room, that refrigeration is a critical component of building HVAC. Now, the show has been going on for a long time, and the name AHR Expo I don't believe is that old. So for someone who hasn't attended in a while, did this show go by any other names?
That's a great question. Actually, it did. The original show was called the National Exposition of Power and Mechanical Engineering. It was not called AHR until about 1947, so it's been a while. Couple generations, when the Professional Engineering Association, ASHRAE, decided to get in on the action. ASHRAE standing for American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers.
That is the name that I still hear probably more often than AHR for you guys that have been doing this for a long time. Diving into this year, how was the general feel of the show? How was the attendee traffic and overall energy compared to previous years?
Well, I saw on day one, right away when the doors opened, we had a flood of activity. And I would say that extended into day 2 with very high activity coming into our booth. And it was exciting to see a lot of our customers come by and chat with us right away.
Yeah, I experienced several customers that attended the facility, and we were their first or second stop. They came with targeted questions and topics that they wanted to discuss with the different associates we had attending our booth.
Does that general excitement agree with the market at this point in time? Is the HVAC market growing, stalled, shrinking? What's the current condition?
Greg, the best thing about HVAC is it never goes down. When I say never, I mean almost never. In 2009, when the last major recession hit, sales for HVAC drives went up. So it doesn't matter what's happening. We need our air conditioning. We need our heating. And it really is an ever-growing industry.
And I can actually attest to that. I mean, when I was going to do some of the education sessions and even one of the ones that our own Tony Gabriel did, there was a good number of people that were in attendance. So to go off of what Don was saying, with this being a growing industry, there are still more people out there wanting to learn, wanting to get educated on the various different topics that are out there.
I was impressed when I see a lot of people from a lot of other countries besides the United States show up there from all different lines of business related to HVAC. And I think the show attendance overall, I've been doing it for about 5 years now, is definitely getting larger, and it's exciting to see all these emerging technologies that show up year after year. Like, oh, that's something new when I tour the show. So.
And that's a great segue, because the next thing I'm interested in is what were some of the most impactful or surprising things, maybe some new things that you saw on the show floor?
Well, I could start with that. I was impressed. There's a lot of VFD integrated motors that I'm seeing. They just kind of stand out with a little VFD mounted to the motor. And maybe I haven't noticed it in previous years, but a lot of the displays had these really tight little packages.
Yeah, to build upon what Michael just said, there's a trend in the industry where you go back 20 years and you would find a facility's VFDs mounted inside of a panel or in a general area in a clean electrical room. What we have is a growing trend of what's called decentralized control, where your VFD is mounted in an enclosure that's suitable for locations besides a clean electrical room. So, as Michael indicated, mounted on the motor itself, or just like with Yaskawa a few years ago, we released Type 12 standalone models, which have been hugely popular, allowing customers to mount the drives in different areas where it's more convenient to their installation.
Yeah, and we've seen in the last 2 years with the release of that narrow Type 12 product that Jordan's talking about, great success in the data center space where they need a little extra protection because it's a little bit rougher environment and they can't afford any downtime. So that's been a great product addition for us.
So it sounds like with a lot of technology, as advances come along, we're able to shrink the size and get into these more compact enclosures and solutions, which is always great because we know that floor space, building space, and panel space, none of it comes cheap. Did you notice any significant shifts in the industry's focus compared to previous years?
I'm noticing a greater emphasis on efficiency and power quality both. And both are elements that have been around for some period of time. But when we use variable frequency drives on fans and pumps, we're principally using them to save energy. But customers are taking their expectations a step further, looking at the efficiency of the drive itself, especially when it comes to low harmonic technologies. Not all drives are created equal. Some drives perform better than others in terms of efficiency. And it's not just the efficient use of energy, especially since this show took place in balmy Florida. Customers were sharing with me how they would have a control house housing a number of drives, and that if those drives were more efficient and thus ran cooler, they could spend less on air conditioning and the energy costs associated with the air conditioning. That was a subject that came up more than once during this show, so it's an item our customers are definitely taking under serious consideration.
As I walked around, I noticed a lot of chiller equipment was labeled with the new A2L refrigerant standard. And as of January of 2025, this year, that has become a new industry standard for residential and light commercial AC units and heat pumps. The impact to drive manufacturers is that this new, more environmentally friendly refrigerant is mildly flammable. So there's been standards that drive manufacturers have had to comply with because the VFDs are mounted in a lot of cases inside these chiller equipment, and they have to make sure that they wouldn't contribute to a flammable situation if that refrigerant was to get loose inside that environment. Most of those equipments had that new label on them, and I thought that was something that was interesting, different from previous years.
I, outside the HVAC world, have always referred to that refrigerant as Freon. Is it proper to say this is a new type of Freon, or am I in a completely different realm here?
I think you're right. For those of us who remember the old refrigerants, it was just Freon was Freon, but Now I think the terminology is shifting more towards refrigerants because of the makeup of these.
Yeah, that's kind of like
These
the word
chemicals.
Kleenex for
Yeah.
tissue, right? Hey, you have any Kleenex? What you mean is a tissue. So Freon was a trade name for a while, but I think that's pretty much been expired. But for the average person who's not in this business, they still use that term. I
Yeah.
sure do when I go to the auto shop and they want to charge me that much for my Freon.
Because I'm not going to remember the name Michael gave, so I'll stick with Freon for
Right.
myself as well.
And our products are being qualified as we speak to comply with those new refrigerant standards. And it's good to know that once we do that, it'll be useful to our customers right away.
Excellent. Good to hear we're staying up with the latest and greatest trends.
Ed's our BACnet expert. Have you seen any increase in the use of that particular protocol in the industry?
Yeah, BACnet itself has seen a wide increase or a large increase, particularly in the U.S. They do a study, I think it was Bizraya, that they have study based off of new installations. And for the U.S. itself, about 93% of new installations are using BACnet. Globally, they're at about 60%, I want to say, off the top of my head. So it's a growing industry as we see it. A lot of the trends, certainly because BACnet is a communication protocol and network, security is definitely something that comes up every so often. Not quite the top of mind for a lot of people, but it is one of the concerns people have. And speaking for BACnet, they are on top of that as well to help people or help create a standard to help with that and create a safer communication protocol so that it doesn't get attacked from the outside as easily.
Yeah, with my industrial automation background, security was incredibly important because you had moving equipment. You could put people's limbs or lives in danger. You might think, well, no big deal if the air conditioning shuts off for a couple minutes, but you also have to think about facilities like hospitals where not only is temperature critical, but so is the particulate in the air and keeping operating rooms clean and things like that. It's great to see they're advancing that security protocol along with the technology.
To build upon what Ed said, BACnet, along with many other protocols, falls into what we call Fieldbus communications. Basically, it's a data connection where, in principle, you're using fewer wires to carry larger amounts of information to not just one drive, but perhaps tens or even hundreds of drives. And what we're seeing is a migration away from your traditional analog communication setup, which requires more wires, more external equipment, to these Fieldbus protocols such as BACnet, where we're simplifying the system and increasing our control capabilities. And this was exemplified by our new product that we had to talk about, the HV305 Microdrive, which principally features integrated BACnet MSTP standard. There was a great deal of customer interest in a compact class drive featuring that communicate protocol as standard.
Actually, I'm going to play a little bit onto that too and kind of take a little twist on there. So, yeah, as Jordan was saying, we definitely have been seeing more connection over a Fieldbus network. And I think as that connection continues to grow, in terms of a trend of people using that more and more, you can get a lot of information out of the drives and based off of that be able to run a system that not just for the drives themselves, but an overall building system to be more efficient, be able to take in the information and be able to run things at the times you want it to. So a building at night when there's pretty much no one in there, probably just want to keep it at a reasonable temperature that it's not too hot, not too cold. But if anyone were to show up, you can get it either warmed up or cooled off at the same time or do better coordination on stuff. And I think we're starting to see that a little bit more and more. Takes a little bit more effort on the control side, but when implemented, I think it's going to enable a lot more of the sustainability features that, or some of the sustainability desires that people are looking for from a building standpoint as a whole.
It's interesting you mentioned that. My furnace at my house is an articulating 20 to 100%, and I absolutely love it because when it doesn't need a high load, it's able to run slowly, quietly, and efficiently. And that's just one unit in a house. And now you talk about a building with dozens upon dozens. With this extra data, they can actually communicate between each other and say, hey, who needs to run at what speed, what power, what's the temp, what's the humidity, and they can optimize their performance amongst each other to keep the users comfortable, but also keep that efficiency. Were there any other trends you guys saw regarding the future of the industry?
As I walked around, and maybe it's things I haven't noticed in previous years, but it seems like customers are asking more of VFDs, especially when it comes to enclosure types and rooftop mounting and things like that. Some VFDs are put inside the chiller. Some building managers want the VFDs put inside an equipment room that's inside the building, and some want, for various reasons, the VFD to be just standing alone in space on a rooftop. And I think it demands that VFD manufacturers develop and maintain a variety of enclosure options to support wherever you want to put your VFD. On a rooftop, it's particularly challenging with directed sunlight, and everybody knows our weather patterns are, at least in the past year, have been getting more harsh. And so you want to be able to tolerate horizontal rain and very harsh weather. So I noticed that as something that is just a reminder to me as I'm looking at my product that our enclosures need to be robust, and we need to give customers what they need.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, the HVAC market, because you have a lot of technologies. Take the simple end device thermostat, right? That basic mercury switch has been the same for decades. Manufacturers are always innovating with a new thermostat, a new kind of control. But in the end, it's all towards energy savings. And that's literally what VFDs do. By controlling the speed of the motor and having variable speed, you don't need to have a damper. And you can save a ton of energy. And that's why the largest market for drives is HVAC.
Yeah, to build upon what Don just said, and to cite the example that Greg mentioned a few minutes ago with his own home furnace, in the commercial space, VFDs have been used for quite a while to save energy and to provide better on-demand heating and cooling, which better meets the ambient conditions in the facility that is being controlled. Greg just mentioned how he has a newer home furnace that isn't just on or off, but rather this furnace is providing a variable output depending on the needs of his home, and it creates fewer variances in temperature and greater comfort. I think most of us in this room can remember as little as 10, 20 years ago, the house is cold, your thermostat calls for heat, the furnace kicks on at full output, and the house gets warm rather quickly, but then you have some overshoot, the thermostat kicks off, and then the house is allowed to cool over a period of time before the thermostat turns the furnace back on again. So in these newer setups where variable speed technology is migrating into the residential market, customers are taking note that the newer systems provide greater comfort.
Yep, I definitely notice it. What are some of the key challenges and opportunities facing the industry right now?
I touched on one earlier, and I think it's just referring to the VFD industry, is that making sure our products are compliant with the new refrigerant standard. And also customers are demanding more from the short circuit rating capabilities of the drives. For example, we just made sure our drives could tolerate 100,000 amps short circuit current with certain protective devices. And I think that's going to be a big benefit to our customers.
There are greater demands on variable frequency drive manufacturers to build products that meet a greater range of industry safety and regulatory certifications. And then, just as we discussed earlier, you go back 20 years and almost every drive was what we call a Type 1, which is either intended for installation in an electrical panel or in a relatively clean room. Now manufacturers are offering drives that are Type 1, Type 12, which is dust tight, Type 3R, which is outdoor rated. Michael had mentioned some customers putting drives on rooftops, which has become popular. So manufacturers are now having to contend with a greater number of SKUs, a greater number of models, and a larger number of safety and regulatory agency listings to comply with.
Actually, I'm going to take a small twist away from the products. One of the things that, just from a little bit of observation, is that I think one of the challenges that we continue to face, both on an industrial side and I think a little bit on the HVAC side, is going to be having the personnel and the workforce to be able to help continue to drive that forward, even though we were getting a good number of new people in. It's a growing industry, but we also want to be able to help grow the next, well, I'll say the next generation, so that we can have those people to keep running and keep everything moving forward.
Yeah, to add to that, in the Southeast, we have a large partner, and at the show this year, a group of them came by. There was 4 or 5 of them and their boss. And these were 24 to 27-year-olds, and they were excited. And I was excited to see how they were excited to be there and doing this, which I've been doing for decades. So it's difficult, but when they start to see the value that they can make a living doing this, then the page is turned and they're on, because it is an ever-growing industry.
Yes, Don. As you were speaking, I remember this conversation I had with this young engineer, her first job out of school. And I asked her, what are you doing? Well, I designed those things. And she pointed up to the ceiling, and these were these air duct outlets that direct the air and circulate the air. And there's a whole science behind thermal modeling and all of the skills that she needs to design the right materials and that kind of thing. And she was totally immersed in that little micro segment of the HVAC world and super excited about what she was doing. And at first I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. But then as she elaborated, it got more and more interesting to me as I listened to her talk about it.
You might, as you're standing there talking with her, think back to a time you were standing in a room with an uncomfortable draft or a blast of hot air from a heat duct that perhaps with a better design would be more comfortable.
Seems to happen at restaurants still all the time, right?
Yes.
And
Usually where my wife's sitting.
as I say, you end up trading seats with somebody who's colder or hotter.
I look at the ceiling when I go into a restaurant now because of that reason.
Even at the trade show in Orlando, where we're just at, towards the door for the outside, there's a huge channel, a cooling diffuser. They go by different names, but so I won't embarrass myself to get it wrong. But it was a massive one. As you walk by it, you could feel the chilled air just coming right off of this huge vent. You're like, that's very inefficient. So there's a lot of room for opportunities.
I always find interesting some of the unique cases, almost like an air curtain or an air blade. I think they have one at Costco. They have a big refrigerated room that you walk into, and there's a big door that's got to be 20 by 12 feet. And you think, man, how inefficient is that? But they're actually blowing a thin stream of air down to help separate the warm part of the building from the cold. I think that's always cool technology, and how people are thinking outside of the box to use air for different things like that. If you go back to the human topic, you can never replace humans completely, or hopefully that never happens. But with the experience that is starting to retire, and as we need to train and keep the industry going, did you see anything around the technologies of IoT and specifically analytics or machine learning? Maybe in the building control itself, or maybe even on the project side, for example, helping to build a schedule for a new facility. Are any companies starting to show use of AI or other tools in that realm?
Yeah, there is a handful of companies that I know and stop by their booth. All they do is this control stuff and AI, and their booth was packed. You would have thought they were giving away free candy there. Maybe they were, I don't know. But basically, it's coming. But for someone who's been doing this a long time, it's hard to exactly visualize how they're going to market what they're doing, because they're competing against very large controls companies like Johnson Controls and Siemens and others who basically kind of own that space. Some of those companies will be acquired by those large companies, but at the end of the day, we're controlling the temperature and the comfort. So how AI is going to play into that, I'm anxious to see.
I didn't notice much about AI there, but maybe along the same lines, I noticed a lot of the digital displays are now looking way more advanced for home and office, and how you interact with your environment and your home control or office temperature control. You're getting this full color, high pixel experience. And I think that almost paves the way for doing a lot more with your environment and monitoring things and being able to feel like you have finer control of what's going on wherever you are. So, yeah.
Sure.
With some of these new trends and changing technologies, do you think it's going to impact you personally in your job or how Yaskawa needs to serve the market?
I know I'm not alone when I say that I'm excited about where AI may lead us in the workplace. And what I see in the future is how will it change the way I work and what I do. As humans, our memory is limited. Some of us have short memories, some of us have long memories, but regardless, our ability to recall things from the past and our research activities can take quite a long time as we, search the web for information. And I think that AI is going to take those two areas, and it's a tool like anything else. And we're going to be able to use that to do faster and better market research and analyze our business to where it begins to drive our strategy in a more responsive way and require less work, actually, but a different kind of work.
I get excited about technology, so I'm excited to see where AI will take us in the future.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners about the show or the industry in general?
Yeah, I really enjoy when customers come to the booth. They come in and they're very excited. They're like, I just love your product. And they tell you everything they love about it, which reinforces what we already know, but you also learn a little bit more about what they do and why we are helpful to them. And you can't get that. That's a face-to-face talking to a person and really having a nice chat about that. So that's my favorite part of the show, is having those interactions with our customers.
I've got to second that from Don. Just to meet new people and also meet the ones that we've been doing business with, the customers that we already know, but the customers that we don't. I mean, we work through our distributors, our OEMs, but they also sell to their customers. And to have their customers come in and say, hey, this has been great, it always makes you feel better. Or I forgot who it was that mentioned earlier, those that are coming in to just learn a little bit more. They said, I've seen this before. I want to learn a little bit more. What can you tell us? That's also been a great thing, too, is to be able to help provide some type of, we'll say, on-the-spot education to help them get them a little bit more knowledgeable about something and be able to go back and say, hey, I now know a little bit more about it, and maybe hopefully be able to dig in some more. I think it's always been that interaction of both people you know and people you don't that have made the show wonderful.
And every year, it's amazing. Having done this very long time now, when people come in the booth and they're like, I don't know what a drive is, you're thinking to yourself, how is that possible? But you forget to what Michael was talking earlier about with the gal designing diffusers. You're down a rabbit hole in a certain area of expertise, and you take for granted that not everyone knows all this stuff. I totally oblige every time to go through it because that's their first exposure to what we do, and it's important to be a shepherd for them.
I'd like to reverse what Ed said. And one of the things that I like to do is, instead of teaching people that come to our booth, is we have those categories, but we also have a category of people where I learn from them. And I like using that activity of people telling us about how they use VFDs and their applications and some of the challenges that they have. And I turn that into a mini voice of customer the other way around. And I end up taking that back and thinking about how can we evolve our products based on what I learned from people at the show. So that's just a unique experience for me, and I look forward to that every year.
I'll make that my third thing that I enjoy.
Yeah, to build upon what Michael just said, much of our product, just like the products offered by other vendors at AHR, is sold through channels. So you have a distributor in between us at the factory and the customer. And AHR provides a great conduit for the customer to directly interact with us face to face.
From this conversation alone, and I've been to trade shows and I've seen you guys in action, there's no question you're passionate about your products, about the technologies, the industries, and the customers themselves. I greatly appreciate everyone's time, their insights. Thanks for being on, and it's time to wrap up. If you want to learn more about this topic, make sure to reach out to your Yaskawa Regional Drive Specialist or local Yaskawa distributor. Please like or follow this podcast to stay informed when new episodes launch, and if we're doing a great job, please leave us a 5-star review. Thanks for joining, and as always, we'll see you next time on VFD Vibes.